stick instead. Yes, you know the title of the program. I come from a place that looks like this, very sort of clone. And so when I come to Asia, I always find it to be bursting with individuality. But in the previous research, it's generally that this kind of visual individuality is treated as context, even if it's slap right bang in the centre. This is how East Asians and Westerners divide flowers. The Westerners do it on the periphery, the Asians on the face of the flower. And I'm going to try and bring that periphery back into the centre. Okay, so that's what I call bursting with individuality, and sort of these faces and this animism, this sort of, wow, you come to Asia and you can feel it all pulsating. And if anyone thinks there's a lack of individuality here, I think maybe they've got their eyes gouged out. Okay, so this guy agrees with me, Professor Takano. He thinks that there's quite, individuality in, that goes too fast. Individuality in Japan, collectivism is overemphasized, and he does sort of experiments on conformity. But he's originally a researcher on, I press the button, so yes, a researcher on the way that mirrors make our reflections look reversed. And he argues that there are two mechanisms, because everyone thinks that images are reversed, whereas in his research, only half of people think that their own image is reversed. And I thought, bingo! Because everyone in the West thinks their image is reversed. So I did, this is the topic of my talk, because I think that Japanese people identify with their self-image, and that's why they don't feel it's reversed. And this is partly due to the fact that perhaps the Japanese people do lots of cut-up forms, like these kind of things in various... I do that now. All this sort of forms they do that enables them to see themselves, perhaps. And I've got some research by my seminar students who do this kind of thing over and over again, and it enables them to see themselves from your point of view, which I can't do. We'll skip that. And so we have this kind of thing that Masuda points out, that people or Kelly Pamela points out, that people in Asia have this kind of sort of self-viewing capability, this hansei noryoku, as they say in Japanese, or the ability to see themselves from your point of view. And, yes, we'll skip Kelly. And this is not only me. For instance, others have claimed that Japanese personality is their face. How could this be possible, you know? Well, for one thing, that the self is not real, as Dennett says. It's only a centre of gravity. Just the centres of gravity aren't real. You never find one. It's just a fiction about yourself. The face also is a kind of fiction about yourself. And also, as in Nisbet and Wilson's wonderful paper, and subsequent research by Libet and others, we know that now that the narrative self comes after. It's ad hoc. It's after effect. It doesn't have any causal validity. So if you take that, then all the self is a kind of reflection. Westerners have a tape recorder in the head, as Ishii Sensei has now proved, whereas Japanese people have a mirror in the head. Are we going to go to the mirror? Boop. No, it's going to skip it. Oh, there it is. Japanese people have a mirror in the head, and so they think of their face as being central. And Wasuji points out that... Why is it going so slowly? I click, and it ignores me. That you can't think of someone without thinking of their face. I've pressed it twice now, and he says that the face is the centre of the personality. Basically, he's into Noel, and while you can think of a person as a bust, if a bust doesn't have a face, then it's not a person. Or that even if you read a book, you always think of the face. So he says it's the centre anyway. So I think that it's possible, at least. And my wife points to her nose when she talks about herself. Okay, so let's go on. This is the sort of thing that Masuda points out, the sort of view from the eye in the sky that Japanese people draw when they draw pictures, or even from right above. You know, that children even can see down upon themselves like this. And this is very, very Japanese as far as I'm concerned. And also, as I've demonstrated, Japanese much more likely to use visual thought. So, bringing us over to mirrors in the head, since the first author is present. I'd like to clarify something that I didn't, because I didn't write the paper, Steve wrote it for me, that I didn't make plain at that time, that it's very, very common to think that this kind of reflective ability is seeing yourself from the point of view of others. But that's the major mistake, I think, of our paper, is that it's not seeing the point of view of yourself as others, but the other, a sort of a special other that is you. And this is demonstrated by previous research. Oh, it does enable you to take perspective taking as well. I won't introduce this because I don't have time. It does enable perspective taking, but it is also the opposite of an audience. If you have a mirror in your mind, you can forget the audience. I can ignore you. I usually use the example of fashion, which Japanese people are very good at. If a Japanese guy goes to university, changes his hair colour to blonde, as they often do, he might feel embarrassed, go pink. But no, because he's got a mirror. So it doesn't matter what you're all thinking. Hey, I like blonde hair. And that is the previous research demonstrate that. If you have a mirror, then you can do these things with your visual self-expression that you can't do if you don't have one. And that's where I'm coming from. I'll skip that too. Lots of visual self-expression. If you look at Japanese people, they're L-shaped because they have these big, long, pointy boots. Next time you see a Japanese person, have a look at his boots. Anyway, so I've done this with self-representations, which are vastly bigger in Japan than in the States, and 20 years ago with photos. But anyway, so yeah, I did an experiment. Takano found what is to me an important difference in that is that Japanese people don't feel themselves to be reversed, whereas Westerners do. This was initial, just an either-or. Then I did a Likert scale, and you can see it's all pretty, what's the word for it? I've got my asterisks in there, my P's. So, then I tried to correlate it with things, and it bombed. First of all, I tried to correlate with a sort of a Japanese-style self-esteem. As you know, self-esteem is very, very different, thanks to Steve's research. But as Steve points out, he doesn't treat it as something that's very realistic. However, I think that, the Japanese people like full in your face. If you look at them, like, oh, no, I can't do anything, but, like their comportment, etc. But unfortunately, this Japanese prime minister... and I demonstrated this 20 years ago in this room with photography, but unfortunately the Japanese Prime Minister takes it all seriously. And so all this positivity is not taken seriously by the sort of the powers that be. And I try to sort of find some kind of correlation with, this time, with this sense of non-reverseness and some other measure of, say, self-positivity. Well, what measure did I use? I didn't use of subjective well-being, which, as far as I'm concerned, is exactly the same as self-esteem. It's just, I'm full of it. I think I'm wonderful. But no, don't take this seriously. Stop it, Mr. Abe. He sort of says, well, yeah, the Japanese people have got to sort of say, I'm wonderful too, but it's all BS. Okay, so skipping what Abe says. In fact, well, no, not skipping it, because in fact, self-esteem correlates with all sorts of really horrible things. And despite the fact the Japanese have the lowest perceived health status, they have the highest life expectancy. Or the fact that, the obesity has a massive high correlation with high self-esteem. Because if you tell yourself you're wonderful, you can just eat as much as you like, which is what we do. However, there are other measures, such as this one here, and despite all this research on holism, no one points out that holistic, that is that one and that one, resemblances are found to be more happy than looking at the details, and which is what Westerners do. Because we're all whispering to ourselves like this, I'm of squares. Woo. But if you're out there in the world, then you see the holistic resemblances. And that's what Japanese people do. But unfortunately, it didn't work, because not only was there no cultural difference, it's non-significant. But that's quite good, though, because the linguistic differences are massive. The Japanese people are as depressed as the suicidal Americans, supposedly, which is utter rubbish. But that, the Prime Minister is taking that for real. But at least here, that the Japanese are slightly happier than Americans, as we know, because they do holistic things. Another thing I tried out was, how would you turn that into a face? And you might put one eye in there, or two eyes, and I thought that perhaps, if you think of your face as being a sort of an autonomous thing, you'd put the two, but again, that didn't result in a difference. I sort of did all sorts of shapes, and no, it didn't work. Japan and the West weren't significantly different, and also both of those things did not correlate with my dependent variable. What is it? Thinking your mirror is reversed or not. Didn't correlate. The last one is my best one, and that is comportment. comportment scale, which is unvalidated, but it's just all my seminar students got together, and it's what I feel is one of the most characteristic traits of Japanese, is that they have this sort of, you know, you can spot them, even in Asian cities. I can see a Japanese person. Not only does he have long boots, but he sort of stands like this, showing you that their thighs are thin and that they're like upright. And they do all this stuff with, you know, passing things with both hands, and I don't know, it's sort of like you can spot a Japanese person, and that predicts social adaptation and success in Japan. So I thought that maybe that might correlate with this sort of thinking that that is me in the mirror. Unfortunately, it didn't. While there is a strong correlation between social adaptation and comportment, I never get the sort of the interrelational, just like as Steve points out, AIT never gets this interrelation, never predicts anything. So all of my measures, you know, self-realizations with manga, not seeing yourself as reflected, comportment, they're all sort of isolates, which is very sad. Anyway, the importance of this, I use it recently in tourism. Japanese people, instead of doing all this dark tourism, you eat snake, they go everywhere going, yay, yay, and this, and they all look at the nice things, and they take selfies with them, groupies, I think they're called. And that's, so I talk about that, how we sort of, do Orientalism, and it's a polite word for it, we downwards comparison, I think, whereas Japanese people do sort of this is my parents-in-law, they go everywhere thinking, hey, we're in here together. And lastly, a couple of things. The Japanese visual management is disappearing. I'll skip tourism. Which is very, very sad because it's not taught in universities, whereas the Japanese, Toyota and all the rest of it did this thing called 5S, where everything is made visual in the real sense of the word visual. You know, open plan offices, all the tools are up on the walls, the company policies in a poster, and this is dying out, unfortunately, like Kanban, because everyone's taught by people like me to use scales like everyone else uses. Ouch! My university is going to be using scales and linguistic stuff from next year, and I'm going to get my salary cut because there'll be downwards comparison. Anyway, but last of all, this is the most serious thing I'll end on, is that due to all this this whispering that we do, come on, my slides are slow. I've got 2 minutes. It's okay. Yes, it's okay. No, it's disappeared. Hold on. Here we go. We'll skip the management. Okay, this is my recent presentation, 2 years ago in Guam, is that we're killing people in this. Because all this language thing that comes in, that the Abe, the Prime Minister, is having counsellors in every school. But previous research shows that if Asians talk about their problems, it's the same as being made to look in a mirror. The Westerners are increasingly, suicide ideation is increased by mirrors. We hate them. Talk about it. Your blood pressure goes up. So while we've been whispering to ourselves, Asian children are dying. That's my conclusion. Thank you. And we've got time for, I finished a minute early there. We've got time for 6 minutes of questions that anyone would like to ask questions of.